The stagecoach rattled into Salt Lake City, Utah on a blistering afternoon in July 1878, carrying Victoria Reynolds and enough determination to fill 3 trunks, though she only carried one. The 23-year-old schoolteacher pressed a handkerchief to her forehead as she stepped onto the dusty Main Street, her dark green traveling dress already wilting in the desert heat. She had traveled all the way from Boston, answering an advertisement for a private tutor that promised room, board, and fair wages for teaching one child. What the advertisement had not mentioned was how the mountains would rise like ancient sentinels around the valley, or how the air would taste different here, dry and somehow full of possibility. A tall man stood waiting near the general store, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of quiet stillness that made Victoria think of deep water. His clothes were clean but worn, and his boots had seen more miles than she could imagine. "Miss Reynolds." His voice was rough, like he did not use it often. "Yes." "Mr. Dawson, I presume?" "Thomas Dawson. Most folks call me Tom." He reached for her trunk without waiting for permission, lifting it as though it weighed nothing. "Wagon is this way. It is about an hour ride to the ranch." Victoria followed him to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 brown horses that flicked their tails against flies. Thomas loaded her trunk into the back, and then offered his hand to help her up onto the wooden seat. His palm was calloused and warm, and Victoria felt a strange flutter in her chest that she immediately dismissed as fatigue from travel. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the wagon wheels crunching over the hard-packed road that led north out of town. The valley spread around them, golden and brown, with patches of green where irrigation had coaxed life from the desert. Victoria studied her new employer from the corner of her eye. His jaw was set firm, his hands steady on the reins, and there was something deeply sad in the set of his shoulders. "Your daughter," Victoria finally said, unable to bear the silence any longer. "The advertisement mentioned she is 8 years old, Emma. She just turned 8 last month." Thomas kept his eyes on the road. "She has had no formal schooling. Her mother used to teach her letters and numbers, but that was 3 years ago." The way he said it made Victoria's heart squeeze. "Her mother passed." "Yes." The word came out flat, final. "Fever took her in the winter of '75. Emma was only 5. I am so sorry." Thomas nodded but said nothing more. Victoria decided not to press. She had learned in her years of teaching that grief had its own timeline, and some wounds never fully healed. Instead, she watched the landscape change as they climbed gradually into the foothills. Cottonwood trees appeared along a creek bed, their leaves shimmering silver green in the hot breeze. The Dawson ranch appeared as they crested a rise. It was a modest spread with a 2-story wooden house painted white, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved lazily in the afternoon heat. Mountains rose behind it all, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in July. Victoria felt something settle in her chest. It was beautiful here, in a wild and lonesome way. A small figure burst from the house as they approached. The girl had dark blonde hair in braids and wore a simple cotton dress that had been mended at the hem. She ran toward the wagon with the fearless speed of childhood, then stopped abruptly about 10 feet away, suddenly shy. "Emma, come meet Miss Reynolds," Thomas said, his voice softening in a way that transformed his entire face. "She has come all the way from Boston to be your teacher." Emma approached slowly, her blue eyes wide and curious. "Did you really come on a train and a stage-coach?" "I did indeed." Victoria climbed down from the wagon, grateful when her feet touched solid ground. "It took me nearly 2 weeks. That is a long time." Emma tilted her head, studying Victoria with the frank assessment of children. "Are you going to live here now? I am going to stay for a while and help you with your reading and writing and arithmetic. Would you like that?" Emma shrugged, but Victoria saw the spark of interest in her eyes. "Papa says I need to know how to read good so people cannot cheat me when I grow up." "Well," Victoria corrected gently, "read well, and your papa is absolutely right." Thomas had unloaded her trunk and now stood holding it, waiting. "I will show you to your room." We cleared out the sewing room upstairs. It has a window facing east, so you will get morning light. Victoria followed him into the house, Emma trailing behind. The interior was clean but sparse, with the kind of order that spoke of a man trying his best without a woman's touch. The furniture was solid and practical, the floors swept, but there were no curtains on the windows, no flowers in vases, none of the small comforts that made a house a home. The room upstairs was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a bureau, a washstand, and a wooden chair near the window. Thomas set her trunk down carefully. "There are extra blankets in the chest if you need them. Nights get cold, even in summer. Emma's room is right next door and mine is at the end of the hall." He paused in the doorway. "We eat dinner at 6. Nothing fancy, but there is always enough." "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." "Tom," he corrected. "We are not formal out here." After he left, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new quarters. Through the window, she could see the barn and beyond it the mountains turning gold in the late afternoon sun. She had left behind a comfortable position at a girls' school in Boston, a circle of friends, and the familiar rhythms of city life. Her mother had wept when Victoria announced her intention to go west. Her father had called it reckless. But Victoria had felt something pulling her toward this adventure, toward the possibility of something different, something true. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Emma peeked around the door frame. "Miss Reynolds, are you unpacking?" "Not yet. Would you like to help me?" Emma nodded eagerly and came fully into the room. Together they opened the trunk and began removing Victoria's carefully packed belongings. The girl exclaimed over each item: the books, the writing supplies, the few simple dresses, the silver-backed hairbrush that had been Victoria's grandmother's. "You have so many pretty things," Emma said wistfully, running her fingers over a blue ribbon. "Would you like to borrow that ribbon? It would look lovely in your hair." Emma's face lit up, then fell. "Papa says it is wrong to take charity." "It is not charity if I offer it as a gift between friends." Victoria tied the ribbon around the end of one of Emma's braids. "There, perfect." They finished unpacking, and Emma chattered about the ranch, the horses, her favorite places to play, and how she could already ride by herself though Papa always made her stay in the near pasture. Victoria listened, asking questions, learning the contours of this new life. The girl was bright and curious, hungry for attention in the way of children who have been too much alone. Dinner was exactly at 6, as Thomas had promised. He served beef stew with potatoes and carrots, bread that was only slightly burned, and strong coffee. The three of them sat at the wooden table in the kitchen, and Victoria noticed how Thomas kept glancing at his daughter, as if constantly reassuring himself she was still there. "This is very good," Victoria said honestly. The stew was simple but hearty, seasoned well. "Emma's mother taught me to cook before she got too sick." Thomas's fork paused over his plate. "Said I needed to know how to keep us fed if anything happened to her. I guess she knew somehow." Emma's small hand reached across the table to pat her father's arm. It was such a tender, grown-up gesture that Victoria had to look away, her throat tight. After dinner, Emma helped clear the dishes, then Thomas sent her upstairs to get ready for bed. He poured more coffee for Victoria and himself, and they sat in the gathering dusk. "I should tell you," Thomas said slowly, Emma has not had much company besides me and the ranch hands. She might be hungry for your attention. I hope that is all right. Of course. That is what I am here for. No. He looked at her directly for the first time since she had arrived. His eyes were gray, she realized, like storm clouds. You are here to teach her lessons, but she is going to want more than that. She is going to want a woman to talk to ask questions to. I cannot give her that. Victoria understood what he was not saying. I will do my best to be what she needs. Thomas nodded, and something in his expression shifted like a door opening just a crack. I appreciate that. She is the whole world to me, only thing that kept me going after Sarah died. Your wife? Yes, Sarah. He said the name carefully, as if testing whether it still hurt. We met in Missouri before we came west. She wanted adventure, same as me. We thought we would build something good out here. He stared into his coffee cup. I guess we did for a while. She would be proud of Emma. The girl is smart and kind. Gets all that from her mother. Thomas stood abruptly, as if the conversation had gone too far. I will be up before dawn to tend the horses. Feel free to start lessons whenever you think best. That night, Victoria lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The house creaked. Through the thin wall, she could hear Emma's soft breathing. And farther down the hall, she heard Thomas's footsteps pacing, before finally going silent. The next morning, Victoria woke to golden sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in a simple gray dress and made her way downstairs. Emma was already at the table, swinging her legs and eating biscuits with jam. Thomas stood at the stove, his hair damp from washing. Morning, he said without turning around. There is breakfast if you want it. Thank you. Victoria poured herself coffee and accepted a plate of bacon and biscuits. What time do you usually start work? Been working for 2 hours already. He finally turned, and she saw the exhaustion in his face. Horses need tending at first light. Got 3 hands who help during the day, but mornings and evenings are mostly mine. What do you do with horses? Break and train them, sell them. Some for ranch work, some for the cavalry at Fort Douglas, some for families needing reliable mounts. A hint of pride crept into his voice. Dawson horses have a reputation for being steady. Never sold a bad one yet. After breakfast, Victoria set up a makeshift classroom in the front parlor. She had brought slates and chalk, primers and readers, paper and pencils. Emma approached it all with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Can you show me what letters you know? Victoria asked gently. Emma slowly wrote out the alphabet, her letters uneven but recognizable. She could read simple words and could count to 100. Victoria assessed that the girl was perhaps at a second-grade level, not bad considering her circumstances. They worked through the morning, taking breaks when Emma grew restless. Victoria quickly learned that the girl learned best when she could move around, so they practiced spelling words while walking in the yard and did arithmetic problems using stones and sticks. Emma was quick-minded but impatient, wanting to rush ahead before mastering the basics. At noon, Thomas came in from the barn, dusty and sweating. He washed at the pump outside and then made lunch, cold meat and bread and cheese. Emma talked nonstop about what she had learned, and Victoria saw Thomas's expression soften as he listened to his daughter's enthusiasm. She did very well today, Victoria said. With regular lessons, she will catch up quickly. That is good. Thomas's eyes met hers, and Victoria felt that strange flutter again. Thank you. The days settled into a pattern. Lessons in the morning, lunch, more lessons or reading in the afternoon, then dinner together. In the evenings, Victoria would sometimes read aloud to Emma, or they would sit on the porch while Emma practiced writing in her journal. Thomas was often there, mending tack or whittling, listening without comment. Victoria found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. The way his hands moved with such sureness and skill. The rare times he smiled at something Emma said, transforming his serious face. The gentleness with which he handled the horses, speaking to them in low murmurs. There was a deep loneliness in him, a wound that had never properly healed. One evening, about 2 weeks after Victoria's arrival, she found Thomas sitting alone on the porch after Emma had gone to bed. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "May I join you?" she asked. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors deepen and fade. "Emma is doing wonderfully with her lessons," Victoria said. "She read an entire chapter today without help. I heard her. She was proud." Thomas's voice was quiet. "I am grateful you came, Miss Reynolds. I did not realize how much she needed this. Victoria, please, and I am glad to be here." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer warmth. "Why did you come west? A woman like you, educated, from a good family, you could have had any position back east. A woman like me," Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean? Smart, cultured?" He seemed to struggle for words. "Beautiful." The last word hung in the air between them. Victoria's heart beat faster. "I came because I wanted to see something different. I wanted to matter, not just be another proper Boston lady teaching proper Boston girls how to embroider and speak French. I wanted real work, real purpose." "You have found it here, then. You matter to Emma." He paused. "You matter to this place. And you." The words came out before Victoria could stop them. "Do you think I matter to you?" Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden porch. "I should check on the horses before full dark." He left, and Victoria sat alone, her face burning. She had been too forward, too presumptuous. He was her employer, nothing more, and she was here for Emma, not to develop foolish feelings for a widowed rancher who clearly still mourned his wife. But over the following weeks, Victoria could not help noticing the small changes in Thomas. How he started joining them for afternoon lessons sometimes, listening as Victoria taught Emma about history and geography. How he began talking more at dinner, telling stories about the horses, or asking Victoria about her life in Boston. How his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she was not watching. One afternoon in late August, Emma begged to show Victoria her favorite spot by the creek. Thomas agreed to come with them, bringing his rifle in case of rattlesnakes or mountain lions. They walked through the golden grass, Emma running ahead and then circling back like an excited puppy. The creek was a ribbon of silver water cutting through cottonwood trees. Emma immediately pulled off her shoes and waded in, splashing and laughing. Victoria sat on the bank watching her, acutely aware of Thomas settling beside her. "She has not been this happy since her mother died," he said quietly. "You have given her that. She is easy to care for. You care for her then?" Victoria turned to look at him. "Of course I do." "How could I not?" Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down. "I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the words for weeks now." "What is it?" Thomas picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "When Sarah died, I thought I died too in some way. The only reason I kept going was Emma. I told myself I would never feel anything again, never let anyone close. It was safer that way." Victoria's breath caught. "Tom, let me finish." He looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her heart ache. "Then you came here, and suddenly everything changed. Emma is not the only one you have been teaching. You have been teaching me without meaning to." "Teaching you what?" "How to feel again. how to want something more than just surviving. He dropped the stone and reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. I know it is not proper. You are Emma's teacher. You have been here less than 2 months, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. Victoria's hand trembled in his. And what do you feel? Like I am waking up after 3 years of being asleep. Like maybe there is still a future worth having. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I know I have no right to ask, but Victoria, could you possibly feel the same way? She thought of all the reasons she should say no. The impropriety, the complications, the fact that she barely knew him. But her heart had already made its choice somewhere between the shared dinners and the quiet evenings on the porch, between watching him with his daughter and seeing the kindness beneath his grief. I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to find something real, she whispered. And then I came here and found you. Thomas's eyes closed briefly, as if in relief or prayer. I am not easy. I have rough edges. I am not sophisticated like those Boston men you must have known. I do not want sophisticated. I want honest. I want true. Victoria squeezed his hand. I want you. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Victoria met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, 2 people learning each other. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, tasting of coffee and sunshine. When they parted, Victoria felt dizzy, grounded only by his hand still holding hers. Papa, Miss Reynolds, come see the fish. Emma's voice broke the spell. They pulled apart, both breathless, and found the girl pointing excitedly at something in the water. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, but everything had changed. Victoria caught Thomas watching her with a soft expression she had never seen before. Their hands brushed as they walked back to the ranch, and the touch sent electricity through her veins. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Thomas kissed her again in the shadow of the porch, longer this time, deeper, until Victoria felt she might dissolve into starlight. Stay, he whispered against her hair. Not just as Emma's teacher. Stay and teach me how to love again. I have forgotten, Victoria. I do not know how anymore, but I want to learn. Victoria pulled back to look at him. You already know. The way you love Emma, the way you have kept going for her, that is love. You just need to believe you deserve to feel it again. Do I deserve it? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. Yes, we both do. They stood holding each other as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. The mountains stood silent against the stars. Victoria felt the rightness of this moment, this place, this man. She had traveled 2,000 miles to find what had been missing from her carefully planned life. And here it was in the arms of a cowboy who had forgotten how to hope. The next morning, Thomas asked Victoria to marry him while they were feeding chickens. It was not romantic by conventional standards. They were both holding buckets of feed, and Emma was chasing a rooster around the yard, laughing. But when Thomas set down his bucket and took her hand and said, I want you to be my wife if you will have me, Victoria thought it was the most perfect proposal in the world. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will. Emma squealed with delight when they told her. She threw her arms around Victoria and then her father, then Victoria again. Does this mean you will be my mama? Victoria knelt down to the girl's level. I could never replace your mother, Emma. She will always be your mama and she will always love you. But I would be honored to be your stepmother if that is all right with you. Emma nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. Mama told me once that if she went to heaven, she would send someone to take care of us. I think she sent you. The wedding was held in Salt Lake City in September, a simple ceremony in the small church with Emma as the only attendant. Victoria wore a dress of dove gray silk that she had remade from one of her Boston gowns. Thomas wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. The three ranch hands came, along with a few neighbors from nearby spreads. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Victoria with such tenderness that several women in the congregation wiped their eyes. That night, in the room that was now theirs together, Thomas held Victoria close and whispered, "I am afraid. Afraid I will not be enough for you. Afraid you will regret leaving your old life." Victoria touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her fingers. "I left nothing behind but pretense and empty propriety. This is my real life, here with you and Emma. You are enough. You are more than enough." He made love to her slowly, carefully, as if she might break. Victoria had been nervous, knowing only what her married friends had whispered to her in confidence. But Thomas was patient, attentive, and by the end, she understood what it meant to become one with another person in body and spirit. The months that followed were the happiest Victoria had ever known. She continued teaching Emma, who blossomed under the combined attention of both parents. The girl's reading improved dramatically, and she began writing little stories about the horses and the ranch. Thomas taught Victoria to ride properly, taking her out on trails through the foothills. She learned to recognize the different bird calls, to read the weather in the shape of clouds, to feel at home in the vast landscape. But she also saw Thomas struggling. There were nights when he could not sleep, when she would wake to find him standing at the window, staring out at the darkness. Sometimes he flinched away from her touch as if afraid of getting too close. He would start to say something tender and then swallow the words, his face closing off. One evening in November, Victoria found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. She sat beside him, waiting. "I do not know how to do this," he said finally. "How to be a husband again. How to let myself feel without being terrified it will all be taken away." "You are doing it right now. Being honest, letting me see your fear. That is how you love someone. But what if I lose you like I lost Sarah? What if I let myself love you completely and then you are gone?" His voice broke. "I cannot survive that again." Victoria took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "You cannot live your life afraid of loss. Yes, something might happen to me. Something might happen to you. That is the risk we all take. But Tom, the alternative is worse. Holding back, protecting yourself, never fully loving. That is not living. That is just existing." "I do not want to just exist anymore," he whispered. "Then do not. Love me. All the way with no reservations. I am not Sarah and I am not going to disappear. I am right here and I am staying." He pulled her close, and she felt his tears against her neck. They sat in the barn while the horses shifted in their stalls and the November wind rattled the doors. It was a turning point, Victoria realized. This moment of breaking open, of choosing vulnerability over safety. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high in the valley, and the wind howled down from the mountains. The ranch became an island, isolated from town for weeks at a time. Victoria learned to cook hearty meals in the cast iron pot that hung over the fire. She taught Emma lessons in the warm kitchen while bread baked. Thomas came in from the cold with frost in his eyebrows, and Victoria would make him coffee and sit with him while he thawed. On Christmas morning, Emma woke them before dawn, excited about the presents Victoria had sewn for her, a new dress and a stuffed horse made from scraps of fabric. Thomas had carved Emma a set of wooden animals, each one detailed and perfect. For Victoria, he had fashioned a beautiful wooden box with her initials carved on the lid. "For your treasures," he said shyly. Inside, Victoria found a letter written in Thomas's careful, unpracticed hand. She read it later, alone, and wept. He had written about how she had saved him, how she had brought light back into his life and Emma's, how he loved her more than he had words to express. It was clumsy and beautiful and absolutely honest. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Victoria and Thomas sat by the fire. She was wrapped in a quilt and he had his arm around her shoulders. "I have something to tell you," Victoria said. "I think I am with child." Thomas went very still. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. My courses have not come for 2 months and I have been feeling ill in the mornings." He turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "A baby, are you happy?" Instead of answering, Thomas pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, his face was wet with tears. "I never thought I would have this again. Another child. I thought Emma would be my only one. And now I am terrified and grateful and so happy I do not know what to do with myself." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." Emma was thrilled when they told her, immediately planning all the things she would teach her little brother or sister. The winter passed slowly, and Victoria's belly grew round. She felt ungainly and tired, but Thomas treated her like precious china, always making sure she was comfortable, always concerned for her health. "I cannot lose you," he admitted one night when Victoria woke to find him watching her in the moonlight. "I know what you said about living without fear, but Victoria, the thought of something happening to you during the birth terrifies me. Women have babies every day. I am strong and the midwife in town is experienced. Sarah was strong too." The words came out raw. Victoria understood then. His first wife must have died in childbirth or shortly after from complications. She reached for his hand. "I am not going to die. I promise you, Tom. I am going to be fine and our baby is going to be fine." "You cannot promise that." "I can promise that I am going to fight with everything I have to come back to you." "Is that enough?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In early June 1879, Victoria went into labor on a morning when the meadowlarks were singing and the sun was bright. Thomas rode to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson who had delivered half the babies in the valley. Emma stayed with one of the ranch hands while the labor progressed. It was long and hard, and there were moments when Victoria understood Thomas's fear. But Mrs. Patterson was calm and competent, and Victoria held onto her promise. She would not leave Thomas. She would not leave Emma. She would meet this baby who already owned her heart. Finally, as evening fell, a baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the squalling infant on Victoria's chest. "A healthy boy." Victoria looked down at her son, red-faced and perfect, and felt love slam into her like a physical force. Thomas came in moments later, his face pale with fear and hope. When he saw Victoria holding the baby, alive and smiling, he dropped to his knees beside the bed. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." They named him Samuel Thomas Dawson. Samuel because it meant God has heard, and Victoria felt that was appropriate. God had heard Thomas's prayers, her prayers, and had granted them this miracle. Emma was smitten with her baby brother, wanting to hold him constantly. Thomas was nervous at first, handling the baby as if he might shatter, but gradually relaxed into fatherhood again. Victoria watched him rock Samuel late at night when the baby would not sleep, singing old songs in his rough voice, and felt her heart swell with love. "You are a good father," she told him one morning as they watched Emma show Samuel a butterfly in the garden. "I am trying, still learning." He pulled her close. "Still learning how to love properly. You are a good teacher. I think you have graduated from that lesson. You love very well now." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his face the way it always did. "I had a good instructor." The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Emma flourished in her studies, progressing far beyond what Victoria had initially planned to teach her. She talked about becoming a teacher herself someday, or maybe a writer. Thomas's horse business prospered, his reputation spreading across the territory. In the summer of 1881, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Sarah Dawson. Rose for the wild roses that grew along the creek, Sarah for the woman whose death had made room for this new life. Thomas held his daughter and wept, years of grief and healing flowing out in those tears. Sarah would have loved her, Victoria said softly. She would have loved you, Thomas replied, for saving us, for teaching me it was all right to be happy again. There were hard times too, a drought in 1882 that nearly broke them, a winter when Samuel got sick and they feared pneumonia. Moments when Thomas still withdrew into himself, when the old grief caught him unaware. But they weathered it together, the way families do, holding each other through the storms. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Victoria back to the spot by the creek where he had first kissed her. The cottonwoods were golden with autumn, and the air smelled of leaves and coming frost. "I want to tell you something," he said, taking both her hands. 5 years ago, I was a man who had forgotten how to live. I was going through motions, taking care of Emma, working the ranch, but I was not really alive. You changed that. You woke me up. You did the same for me. I was sleepwalking through my old life, trying to be what everyone expected. I know I am not perfect. I still have days when I struggle. Days when I am not good with words or emotions. Days when I close off. Victoria touched his face. I know. And I love you anyway. I love you because you keep trying, keep learning. You asked me once to teach you how to love. But Tom, you have taught me just as much. You have taught me what real love looks like. It is not pretty words or grand gestures. It is showing up every day. It is choosing each other, even when it is hard. He kissed her then, deep and long, and Victoria tasted 5 years of shared life in that kiss. The joys and sorrows, the quiet moments and the loud ones, all of it woven together into something stronger than either of them alone. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, to where Emma was watching the younger children and dinner was waiting. That evening, the whole family sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. Samuel chased fireflies in the yard. Rose slept in Victoria's arms. Emma read aloud from a book of poetry. Thomas sat with his arm around Victoria's shoulders at peace. "Are you happy?" Victoria asked him softly. "I did not think I could be this happy, not after Sarah died. I thought that part of my life was over." He looked at her, and his eyes were clear, no shadows in them. "But you showed me there is always room for more love, more life. I am grateful for every day with you, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Those are the days when we learn what we are made of." As the stars came out one by one over the valley, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Salt Lake City as a hired teacher, intending to spend a year or two before returning to Boston. Instead, she had found a home, a family, and a love deeper than anything she had imagined possible. Emma had needed a teacher, and Thomas had asked her to stay and teach him how to love. But in the end, they had all been teachers and students together, learning the lessons that mattered most. How to heal from loss, how to open your heart again after grief, how to build a life from hope and hard work and daily choices to keep loving even when it was difficult. The ranch thrived over the years. Thomas trained some of the finest horses in Utah territory, and people came from as far as Wyoming to buy from him. Emma grew into a lovely young woman, eventually going to the new university in Salt Lake City to study literature. She came home often, always bringing books for her stepmother and stories for her younger siblings. Samuel inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's love of learning. He was 8 years old when Rose started school, and he took his role as big brother seriously, protecting her from the teasing of other children and making sure she always had someone to play with. Rose was the wild one, fearless and joyful, climbing trees and racing horses and driving her parents to distraction with her adventures. She had Thomas's stubborn determination and Victoria's quick mind, a combination that meant she usually got her way. In 1885, Victoria gave birth to another son, Henry. Thomas was 42 by then, Victoria 30. They laughed about being old parents, but Thomas was more confident this time, having remembered fully what fatherhood meant. He could change diapers and walk a colicky baby without panicking. He sang lullabies without self-consciousness. "You have come a long way," Victoria teased him one night as she watched him expertly soothe Henry to sleep. "Remember how terrified you were when Samuel was born? I was terrified I would mess everything up, that I would not know how to be a husband and father at the same time. And now I know the secret. You just do your best and love as hard as you can. The rest works itself out." Victoria smiled. He had learned that lesson well. The children grew, and the ranch became a place of noise and laughter. Emma brought home a young man from the university, a teacher named Jacob who treated her with respect and made her laugh. Thomas grilled him mercilessly, but Victoria saw the approval in her husband's eyes. Their eldest daughter married Jacob in the spring of 1888, and Thomas wept as he walked her down the aisle. "I am losing her," he said to Victoria that night. "You are not losing her. You are watching her begin her own adventure the way we began ours." Victoria held his hand. "That is what parents do. We love them, teach them, and then trust them to make their own way. When did you get so wise?" "I learned from a cowboy who forgot how to love and then remembered beautifully." Samuel followed in his father's footsteps, working the ranch and learning everything Thomas could teach him about horses. Rose, true to form, announced at 16 that she wanted to be a doctor, scandalizing half the valley and making Victoria proud. Henry was still young, but already showing signs of being the steady, thoughtful one. In 1890, on a summer evening much like the one when Victoria had first arrived, Thomas and Victoria sat on the porch alone. The children were scattered. Emma in her own home with a baby on the way, Samuel in the barn, Rose studying, Henry asleep. The mountains stood silhouetted against the fading light. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Leaving Boston, your old life?" "Never, not once." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "This is exactly where I was meant to be. I asked you to stay and teach me how to love. You did more than that. You taught me how to live again, how to be whole." Victoria thought back to the advertisement she had answered 12 years ago. A simple request for a teacher for a young girl. She had come expecting a job and found everything she had not known she was searching for: love, purpose, family, home. "You taught me too," she said. "You taught me that real life is not about propriety and expectations. It is about honesty and hard work and choosing to love every day, even when it is difficult." Thomas turned to kiss her forehead. "We have had a good life. We have. And we still have more to come." They did. Emma gave them 3 grandchildren. Samuel eventually married a rancher's daughter and expanded the horse business. Rose shocked everyone by getting into medical school and becoming one of the first female doctors in the territory. Henry grew into a quiet, artistic young man who painted landscapes of the mountains he loved. Through it all, Thomas and Victoria remained each other's anchors. They had their disagreements, their difficult seasons, times when money was tight or the children tested their patience. But they always came back to each other, to the promises they had made by the creek and renewed every day through small acts of love and commitment. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas gave Victoria a painting Henry had made of the ranch. In it, Victoria could see the white house, the barn, the mountains behind, and the cottonwoods by the creek. It was their world captured in oils and canvas. "So you never forget what we built," Thomas said. Victoria hung it in their bedroom where she could see it every morning when she woke. But she needed no reminders. Every moment of their life together was written on her heart. As they grew older, Thomas's hair went gray and Victoria found silver threads in her own dark locks. Their hands became weathered, their faces lined with years of sun and smiles and tears. But when Thomas looked at Victoria, he still saw the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach into his life. And when Victoria looked at Thomas, she saw the man who had been brave enough to risk his broken heart again. In 1898, 20 years after Victoria's arrival, the whole family gathered at the ranch for Thanksgiving. Emma was there with her husband and 3 children, Samuel with his wife and their 2, Rose on break from her medical practice, Henry with his new bride. The house overflowed with noise and laughter and love. That evening, as the family sat around the expanded table, Thomas stood to say grace. He was not a man of many words even after all these years, but when he spoke, everyone listened. "I am thankful for this family," he said simply. "For every person at this table. 20 years ago, I was a man who had lost hope. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just surviving. Then Victoria came, hired to teach Emma, but she taught us all so much more. She taught me that broken hearts can heal, that it is never too late to love again, that the best things in life are worth the risk." His voice thickened with emotion. "So thank you, Victoria, for answering that advertisement. Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching me how to love." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Around the table, their children and grandchildren wiped their own eyes. Emma stood and raised her glass. "To Papa and Mama, for showing us what real love looks like." Everyone echoed the toast. Thomas sat down and reached for Victoria's hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. She squeezed back, thinking of the journey that had brought them here. From that first silent wagon ride to this moment, surrounded by the family they had built together. After dinner, Victoria and Thomas walked down to the creek, needing a moment alone. The November air was crisp, and the cottonwoods stood bare against the darkening sky. They sat on the same bank where Thomas had first kissed her 2 decades ago. "You remember?" Victoria asked. "Every moment. I remember being terrified of what I was feeling. Terrified to want again, to hope again. And now I am just grateful, grateful for every day. Grateful you were brave enough to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy and his sad little girl." Victoria laughed. Emma was never sad, lonely maybe, but full of light. Just like her father once he let himself feel it. They sat in comfortable silence, the way long married couples can. The creek murmured its eternal song. In the house behind them, their family laughed and talked and created memories. This was what happiness looked like, Victoria thought. Not a single moment of perfection, but a lifetime of choosing love, building a home, weathering storms together. "I love you," Thomas said, simple and direct as always. "Thank you for my life." "I love you too, and thank you for mine." They walked back to the house hand in hand, moving slowly in the gathering darkness. Through the windows, they could see their children and grandchildren, the legacy of their love. Emma was holding her youngest, rocking him gently. Samuel was telling a story, his hands gesturing wildly. Rose was in deep conversation with Henry about something artistic. The scene was warm and golden and perfect in its imperfection. Thomas paused on the porch, looking back at the land he had worked for 30 years. The mountains were dark shapes against the starry sky. The barn stood solid and strong. Everything he and Victoria had built together with their hands and hearts and stubborn determination. "No regrets?" Victoria asked softly. "Not a single one." They went inside together, back into the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of their family. And in that moment, Victoria knew that answering that advertisement had been the best decision of her life. She had come to teach a child, but had found so much more. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found a man who had forgotten how to love and helped him remember. And in teaching him, she had learned the most important lesson of all, that love is not something you know. It is something you do, every single day, with patience and grace and unwavering commitment. Years later, long after their children had grown and scattered to their own lives, Thomas and Victoria would sit on that same porch and remember. They would talk about the early days, when everything was new and uncertain. They would laugh about their awkward courtship, his clumsy proposal, her nervousness on their wedding night. They would remember the births of their children, the challenges they had overcome, the moments of pure joy that had sustained them through the hard times. And always, Thomas would thank her for coming, for staying, for teaching him how to love again. And always, Victoria would tell him that he had been the teacher too, showing her what real life could be, what real love looked like. The ranch would eventually pass to Samuel, who would maintain his father's reputation for fine horses. Emma's children would come visit every summer, running through the same meadows their mother had played in. Rose would practice medicine in Salt Lake City, saving lives and breaking barriers. Henry would paint landscapes that captured the wild beauty of the Utah Territory, and later the state of Utah. But the heart of it all would always be the love story that began with an advertisement and a long wagon ride in July 1878. The story of a teacher who came west looking for purpose and a cowboy who had forgotten how to hope. The story of two broken people who found wholeness in each other. The story of a family built on love, patience, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. In the end, that was the lesson Victoria taught Thomas, and he taught her. That love is not a feeling that happens to you, but a decision you make every single day. It is showing up when things are hard. It is being patient when you want to be frustrated. It is forgiving when you have been hurt. It is choosing to see the best in each other, even on the worst days. It is building something together, brick by brick, moment by moment, year by year, until you have created a life that is richer and fuller than either of you could have made alone. And on quiet evenings when the mountains turned gold in the setting sun and the creek sang its eternal song, Thomas and Victoria would sit together and marvel at what they had built. Not just the ranch or the house or even the family, but the love itself. A love that had started with fear and hesitation, grown through patience and trust, and matured into something unshakable and true. "I am glad you answered that advertisement," Thomas would say, the same words he had spoken 100 times before. And Victoria would smile and reply, as she always did, "I am glad you asked me to stay." Because in the end, that was the heart of their story. He had asked and she had stayed. She had taught him to love and he had taught her to live. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would echo through generations. A love story that began in the Wild West of 1878 and lasted all their days, a testament to the power of second chances, the courage to heal, and the transformative magic of choosing to love with your whole heart, every single day, for the rest of your life.